just a tip, if anybody is watching, if you're watching at home, if the resolution on the video isn't great, you can change it. The way to do that, so here's the code editor. If you go into settings and click on quality, you may be able, depends on the video, you can sometimes increase the quality. And if you do, I think you may have to refresh or reload it at that point. And the quality may be higher, but I think it should be clear enough that you can actually see. Well, the important thing is simply that you can actually read the code editor. That's been the problem a few times, is the code has been blurry, which obviously is a pretty significant problem if you can't actually see the code. Okay, so wanted to just go over a few other things in here. Okay. So notice we're using router rather than app for our GET requests. Okay, so we'll use this syntax regularly. So router is the express library for handling URLs. And we talked about, kind of touched on these app.verbs like get. So we could also handle post requests in the same way. If we had a form and we wanted to process the form submissions, instead of writing a .get, we could write a .post. So let's try a couple of things here. The first thing we're going to do, let's create a second page on here. So let's go ahead and create a new page. I'll create a new file. I'm going to create a new EJS file, which if you're using WebStorm is an option you probably have. If you don't, just create a generic file and let's name it about.ejs.
So you click file?
I right-clicked on my views folder because any new views have to go into the views folder.
Because I'm in the EJS and it doesn't give me that option.
I don't understand what you mean. You're in the EJS.
I'm in the WebStorm. I right-clicked and I went into new. I'm looking and I can't find the...
Then just choose new file and it will let you pick your own extension when you just say file.
EJS.
EJS. So let's just set up a kind of a basic HTML template here. We'll put in a title. So there's our EJS view. So far it's just basically a static HTML page. Now this is probably a good place. I'm going to try. We've installed NodeMon globally. We're going to be making changes rather than stopping and restarting our application. If we run it with NodeMon, that's going to be easier. So I'm going to go to my command prompt and stop the current application. Now I'm going to see, I'm not sure if we have to configure it a little bit or if we'll have to, we've installed NodeMon globally. I think there's one change we may have to make. But I'm going to try running it with NodeMon. Oh, actually, hang on. There is something we're going to have to change. Let's go to the package.json file. So this was the package.json that the Express generator built for us. Okay, so it added all these dependencies. And notice it says the start, here's the start command, node bin www. Well, what the heck is this bin www? We haven't seen that before. If you think about the bin, we used the bin folder in ASP.NET. Anybody remember what went in the bin? What got sent to the bin folder when we used Visual Studio? Good guess. It's actually something else. I probably have our files. Why don't we go look at one? So here's. So here was our Visual Studio application, right? Here are all our ASPX files with all of our HTML, all the CS files that had all of our code. If I open up bin, what kind of file are we going to see here? There won't be many files in here. Right? Remember?
Oh, the compiled.
Right. The DLL was all the C# code that got compiled into a single DLL file. That was stored in the bin. So actually in Node, in an Express application, the bin is actually the same thing. The compiled file. It's not a DLL, but it's this file. If we open it up. It basically holds all of the compiled code. You just can't really see it, but it's really our, well, you know what, maybe I wouldn't say it holds all of the compiled code, but this is where it kind of is configured. Generally, we don't need to change this stuff. We'll make one change in it later. But our package.json says this is the starting point of our application. Is actually here. That file launches it when we type npm start. But by default, it uses the node process, right? We could run an application in command prompt by typing node in the start of the name of a JavaScript file. The problem is this won't notice any changes. So we still want to start it in the same place, but instead of node, let's try starting it with nodemon instead. We've installed nodemon globally. I'm hoping this will work. If it doesn't work, we just have to install nodemon in our lesson 5 folder, and then this should work. So change the start process from node to nodemon in your package.json. So on line 6, we're just adding those 3 characters. So now I'm going to try npm start again. We'll see whether this starts with nodemon. I hope so. Yep, so it is running because we've installed nodemon globally. So now we can use nodemon on any Express generated application. We just have to change that one line in package.json, change the start command, say don't use the base node process, use nodemon instead. So now my app's restarted. I can still load my home page. Now I'll try to load about. So we no longer have the cannot get. We now get what we're used to. Express generates a 404. Why did we get a 404? We have a view called about. Why didn't it load? So here's our about view. Why are we getting 404? Yeah, we haven't handled that route. Our application doesn't know that this URL is supposed to load this file. So we need to go here and add so this is going to be similar. We want to write a get handler when the URL is /about. We've got our 3 parameters in our callback for request, response, and next. So it's an anonymous function, just like up above. How do we load the about page? So our response object has a render method. Yeah. So we don't have to specify that it's in the views folder. That's assumed. We also don't have to supply the file extension. We've already set up our application. Our Express application knows EJS is the template engine. That's right here in package.json that we're using EJS. So we don't need to put on about.ejs. So if we save this change, we've now added our URL mapping, our route handler. NodeMon should restart, which it did.
Wait, so we don't need title?
Not on this page because there is no title. See, Scott, here we have a variable called title.
All right, yeah.
On this view, we didn't use any variables.
Okay. So can you go back to the index with me?
So now our about view is going to load. So we could pass any variables we wanted to this page. Let's maybe do that. We're going to add a variable on, and then we'll display the variable on the page. So let's say, so we're going to pass in JSON format a variable called, I don't know, we'll call it my name. Put in your name. So load the about view and pass in a variable called my name to the view and give it a value. So now not only are we loading the page, but we're sending data to that from the server side to that view. Here would be our syntax. So those are our tags, our server-side tags. Equals would be the equivalent of an echo statement. It'll output the value. And the spacing doesn't matter. If it's more readable, you can put spaces in, you can leave, or you can omit them. This will display that variable that we're passing from our root file.
I am bracket. What is that? That's a percentage sign?
Yep. It's the percent sign. So if we save those changes, NodeMon will restart again. So you can really see where NodeMon is handy here. We can just work on the application. It's always up to date. And if we make any mistakes, the app won't restart, and we'll see the error directly in the command prompt.
Why was it is the red 500? Is that bad?
That is bad. So now whatever variable we're setting up in our root file is passed to our view. These variables, I believe, are case sensitive. Let's say I do this. I write it all lowercase. So in my view, I'm looking for a variable called my name. In my root file, I've written it in camel case with a capital N. NodeMon restarts. When I refresh now, it says that variable is not defined. So then any variable we try and display in our view has to match a variable that's passed to the page with that exact same name. So if I fix that, it'll restart and we're back. I just want to go back to something from a few weeks ago. I think it's actually probably all the way from week 1. right? So this is the pattern we're starting to follow. All of our actual front-end pages are going to have EJS extensions, and they live inside of the views folder here. So these are mostly HTML with some server-side values injected, okay? Much like we would do in PHP. Or we could even have a loop. Let's say we're going to output a list of data or a drop-down. We can use a for loop or a for each loop in here with server-side tags. So that's the view piece. The controller, I'm not exactly sure why in Express they got away from the word controller. The controller, which we said were our logic files, they handled requests, they interacted with the database, and they loaded the views and sent data from the views. In Express language, they've just called these routes instead of controllers, but the routes and controllers are the same thing. So I might use those controllers tell the application what to do, what page to load, what values to send to that page if there are any. And then the last piece, which we're not going to work with until next week, are the models. So we don't need models for this. You don't need models for your lab or for your assignment, because the models are the piece that let the controllers or the routes talk to our database. We don't have a database yet, so we don't need the models. So we can build an application with just the views and controllers, just this part. Client makes a request, we route the URL, we send back a view with some data to the client. We're kind of skipping this section for today and on assignment 1. We'll add that piece in starting next week, but not yet. Okay, let's try something else. I want you to make one more page. Actually, before we go on, anybody have any questions so far? Anything we've done confusing, or does this seem fairly clear? Okay, we'll have to look at it when we have a chance. Matt, question?
For all the variables you want to like set, do you have to have it in that one JSON type?
Ah, very good question. Let's do that. What if we want to pass in more than one variable? Do we need a separate JSON array, or can we do it here? We actually can do it right here.
Maybe.
Does it all have to be there? Like,
Yes, so typically, this is kind of the typical structure. Would look something like this, right? In fact, package.json is a good model of what that looks like. There's your JSON array.
So do I show that page again when you do the taping? Oh, okay. So
it's one JSON array. I could even do it this, however, format it however you like. It's one JSON array that holds all of the variables we want to pass back. So these may be individual values, or one of those things might be its own array, like a result from a database query, right? We have a list of data that we want to pass back to display on a page. So we have one JSON array to send as much data, as many different values as we want back to the page.
I tried to type in month and it's not turning purple.
Do you have the comma before it?
Yeah.
So now, let's say I want to put another paragraph on here. But now we can output our month variable here.
Would it be good, proper practice on that page to like declare some other like variables? So it's like for my about page, I would make an about variable, and then I would make all like my JSON in that, and then just call the about right into it instead of actually like building it right in.
You could, but then you're going to have to parse them all on the front end if you're sending one object.
Okay.
So now if I refresh, here's our second variable. That's a very good question. Thank you for raising that
You
one,
put a
Matt.
comma-
So there's no limit. That JSON array is unlimited. You can put whatever you need to in there.
Do you put a comma after February then, or just leave it?
Nope, because February is
Last one.
the last item, but you need a comma.
Before.
Yeah, after each key value pair except the last one. Adam?
What would it look like if you're pulling that, you're getting information from a database and trying to put it into a variable and then put it to.
Okay, good question. We'll do it next week, but I'll show you what it will look like. It would look something like this. Run DB query using model and store results. Okay. Let's say we wanted this to be, we'd create a variable, let's say called students, right? Let's say we wanted to pass back a list of student data. Okay, equals, would be like student.find. That would be the method we'd call on the model that would run a query on the student model. So now we have this object that holds all of the student data, right? Could be one record, it could be a million records. So then we would just simply pass it back like this.
Should we type in our students?
No, don't copy this. This is just for example. But we would just pass it in as an as an object. And then on our view, we would be able to loop through and enumerate each column in a loop. So that's exactly where we're going. We'll not sure if we'll get there quite next week or the week after, but that's exactly what it will look like. So we run the query, we store the results in an object, and that object is just part of that JSON array that gets sent to the page.
Why do you want to type age? Is it age or my age?
It's up to you. These are just whatever's in purple,
Oh,
these are
yeah.
variables. So you can call them whatever you like. So don't copy that code, but that's where we're going once we bring the MongoDB and the modeling piece into it. Okay, so I want you to try one. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to create a new page, a new view called random. Okay, so it'll be called random.ejs. In your index.js, you'll need to add a third get handler to load your random page. And on your random page, what you have to do is find the JavaScript function to generate a random number and pass that number to your view for display. So you can do this on your own. You can do it with someone else. I'm not marking you. So you're creating a new page called random. You're going to add a root handler here that will load that page. But inside of it, not only are you going to load the page, you're going to have to find the JavaScript function that generates a random number and sends that random number back to the page, and that will show on your page. Let's take a few minutes, give you 5-10 minutes, and then we'll go over it, and then we'll take a break.
I'm kind of lost. Root hand. Find JS random number. What do you mean by that?
There's a function in JavaScript to generate a random number.
Oh, okay.
I want you to find what that function is and implement it. So every time you refresh that page, it displays a different number.
So should you have like a button you can click to get that random number?
No, you can just click refresh. Every time you click refresh, every time the page loads, it just displays a random number. Varun, good? That done? Okay. Well, we'll start here. So what have you got? How did you display the number here?
You just do the percentage thing, like.
Yep.
Just made the function thing.
Okay. And-
Yeah, so I put,
And what'd you call your variable that you're displaying?
I don't know.
Okay. There's our view. We just need a variable being output on the page. So just a basic HTML template with one variable being displayed using the EJS syntax. That was all we needed. Okay, so what did you do inside of index.ejs?
So first I'll make that router.get,
Okay,
then inside that there should be a variable and which says math.random.
Okay. okay, so we want to run a router.get. Okay, so tell me what you have in here.
Response.random.
Yep,
So in the brackets, there is random main.
okay, yep, so we're going to load our EJS view called random.
Yeah, so there's a variable which says math.random.
So we're going to pass in a variable also called random, and the function you used to get it was, you said math random. So that's a built-in JavaScript function in the math. Whoops. So if we call math.random. So this calculates a random number, assigns it to our variable called random, and then passes that value to our view, which is also called random. So we're calculates a random number, passes it to the view called random. Now we could do this in a separate line of code. We could calculate out the value first and put it in a variable and then pass the variable to our page, or we can do it, this is more efficient, doing it all in one line of code. So now if we go to our random file, get some kind of random number every time. All right, that's good, Varun. That was exactly what we were looking to do. Adam?
What are the like, since they have different like formatting, like you set like a min or max for that? Or
Great question. Anybody want to take a stab at answering that?
well, if you're looking for a number between 1 and 10, you just multiply it by 10.
Okay, that would be an option, right? You could do that.
Mine's not rendered.
So we could put it in.
At the same time, I also suggest rounding it to decimal points.
Yeah, we could do that as well. There's lots of different things we could do. That makes sure it's above 0. So what we would want to do if we wanted to do put those kind of rules on, like a min, a max, or we wanted to round it. So that's where, we need to look up exactly how that method works so we can see what other options we have with it. There may be additional parameters. We didn't supply any parameters here. So right here, if we supply a min and a max, that would be a way of doing it. Those are optional parameters. So we'll just undo that. Adam, what do you want to set as a range, acceptable range here?
Just like 1 and 100.
So if we call math.random with those two values, instead, it doesn't seem to work.
Mine doesn't even read it.
Oh, we'd have to use this, we'd have to include this function and then call it that way. So it's not actually built in. There is math.round though. So if we wanted to round it, we could then use math.round around that, or math.max, math.min. So we'd have a series of nested functions, which might be simpler to do ahead of time, before we call res.render, calculate it out and then just pass the value. So whatever processing or calculating we need to do, we do that in the root file, and then we pass the results we want to the view for display. We're going to come back to this. I just want to explain what this line of code does. Whenever we're using module.exports, all that means is make this file public. So it's available and visible to other files in the application. So without this, the code executes, but no file can actually see it. No other file is able to access this. And we should probably look at one other thing. We'll take a break in just a second. One file we didn't look at, which I was a bit remiss. Here's our app.js. So this is what the generator builds. We haven't touched this code. All of this stuff was generated by the Express generator. So all of our dependencies are linked. This is where our controllers get included. So it created a route for index and for users. So if we're creating additional controllers here, if we were building, let's say, Blackboard in Node.js, we'd have a students controller to handle students. We would need to link it into our application here. And that controller would need to be made public, need to be exported so it was visible. This is where, so setting up things like a favorite icon, by default, this is disabled. We can enable it after. It's saying, setting up where all our static files are, so where the images, JavaScript, and CSS files live inside of the directory called public. So you could change that if you wanted to change that. Here's our error handling. So Brandon, this comes back to your earlier question, 404 is already handled, right? So right now it just calls next. If we wanted to, we could log to the console or load an error page, redirect to an error page. We could do a res.render 404 here. Then there's ways of turning on development and exporting the whole application. So we'll work and make some changes in here later on. We probably won't need to for this week. We will for next week when we start connecting to our database, etc. We'll need to do some other things in here. The only thing we may do today, if we have time, is uncomment this and add a favorite icon. By default, to comment that out. Once we have one, we can put it in. Any questions about how this is all kind of working together? Okay, we'll take a break in a second. What I want to do when we come back, I want to look at where static files like images and CSS go. We'll add an image to one of these pages. We'll add CSS. So we'll look at how we link that in. Then I want to show you how to make a shared header. So just like we used an include file or require in PHP, or we used, how do we do it in ASP.NET? We use the master pages. We want to be able to create a shared navigation bar and put our CSS links and JavaScript links in there and have all of our views share it. So we're going to strip out some of the HTML from our views. We're going to make a header file and link it in. So then we've got CSS, images, shared header. Then you'll basically have everything you need to do for the assignment. So I'm going to give you a lab to practice, and then you can have your assignment as well. And if we have time, we'll also try and deploy this to Azure today. Okay, let's take a break. Be right with you, Scott. Just a minute.